All right. So before we dive into the first story, Cindy, did you know that there is a city in Massachusetts called Sandwich? It's called Sandwich, Massachusetts. And if you're in that city, and let's say you're driving over the speed limit, who do you think arrests you?
The sandwich police.
The Sandwich Police. Do we have any pictures of the Sandwich Police? Wow. There it is. Look at that. In Massachusetts, there are cops driving around with a car that says Sandwich Police. Cindy, do you have any comments on that?
I'm just wondering what happens if your cheese is dangling out of the hoagie.
Straight to jail. All right. So as we mentioned in the opening, we have some people in this country who believe that spray painting swastikas on cars throughout the nation and vandalizing the business of an African American will solve the problems that we're currently facing. Josh, what's that about?
Well, it's actually accurate. There are people attacking the businesses of Elon Musk, who's of course from South Africa. It's interesting, actually. So the way this whole thing started was basically people doing these takeovers, protest groups, going into Tesla dealerships, sitting there, having the police throw them out. All the camera crews are there taking video of it. And it looks like people are fighting back against Tesla. Then it escalates. Then you start having people going around threatening Tesla drivers, throwing things at them, yelling at them and so on, leaving nasty notes in the windows. Then it escalates. Then you start having people firebombing Tesla cars, lighting them on fire, throwing Molotov cocktails on them. Someone recently set themselves on fire, presumably by accident, while firebombing a Tesla.
That's rough.
And basically it's just accelerating. Nationwide now, a lot of it happened in Seattle, but here's where it gets really interesting. Elon Musk comes out and he publishes a tweet and he says there's an investigation, claims, right? This is just what he says. He says there's an investigation. They named 5 different far-left groups, including Democratic Socialists of America, and he claims that they're the ones behind all of this. And then he claims they're getting funding through Act Blue, which is a major Democrat funding platform. And then he names a whole bunch of very far-left activists, major funders of these types of movements. And basically he leaves it at that and says, if you know anything about it, leave it in the comments on my X post. And then what happens is Donald Trump, the president of the United States, holds an event at the White House, and Trump drives out, drives it once they bring it out, buys a red Tesla, like the red MAGA hats, and then encourages people to buy a Tesla. And so this kind of became a bit of a spectacle. And then Donald Trump, while he's speaking, right, he's asked by a journalist, would you define this as domestic terrorism? Trump says, yes, I would call these attacks on Tesla an act of domestic terrorism. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene, they have the Doge Commission, a group of several members of Congress signed a letter asking the DOJ and the FBI, and remember, they are investigating stuff like this, ask them to investigate who is behind the attacks. They name Antifa, suggesting that they believe Antifa may be behind it. At least that's what the congressional letter states. And they want to have any organization tied in with the funding investigated by extension of that. Based on Elon Musk's allegations, they repeat the name of Act Blue, although I believe they deny the allegations. And yeah, it looks like they could now be investigated possibly for terrorism.
Well, let me ask you something what's the definition that they're using of domestic terrorism, and do you think it fits what's happening to Tesla?
So the phrase domestic terrorism was used a lot by Biden. And you could argue he kind of lowered the threshold of what could be domestic terrorism. If you were a parent going and maybe making angry statements at a school board meeting, they claimed, for example, that the parents were threatening the school boards. The school boards never filed criminal complaints. There was no record of actual threats, but they wrote to the FBI requesting the parents be investigated as terrorists. That was allegedly a type of domestic terrorism, at least investigated by the FBI as such. But if you want to go by the actual definition, terrorism is defined as using violence or threats of violence. You're terrorizing people using fear as a tactic in order to elicit a political outcome. And so if people are making threats or committing acts of violence with the intent of, affecting political change, that is by definition terrorism. But the issue we had in this country is for a long time, I mean, going back to the second term of the Obama administration, is technically the far left. I'm talking like Democratic Socialists of America and a lot of the open communist organizations that are in fact behind the BLM riots, the Palestinian groups. I'm not saying all of them are part of this, but the big money behind them, it's a handful of organizations. And Antifa, they do in fact get money through a lot of these organizations, and they do in fact use violence and threats of violence as political tools. But they've just never faced charges on it. And so what you're seeing now is the basic modus operandi of the very far left now being looked into as actual terrorism.
You know, one thing, as I was watching some of these attacks and reading some on Reddit too, and you never know like which one is real and which one is just someone, because someone was like, I was riding my bike and a Tesla cut me off, so like, you know, I keyed it and I did this, and I'm like, well, did you really, or is this just a story you're telling? So it's a, you know, it's a little, it's hit or miss. But I do wonder, because up until basically the assassination attempt, I mean, Elon, for a period of time, he was like an out-and-out Democrat. He was publicly saying like, I'm voting for Biden, right? I believe.
The left loved him.
The left loved him.
But he's with Obama. He was
exactly. My question was, Josh, are the people who are vandalizing the Tesla owners, are they specifically looking for a Tesla model 2024 and up? Like any 2023 and older models they don't touch? Like,
yeah, maybe, right? They're like on the road and they're like, oh, the Tesla, and they like look at.
Yeah, what year is this? Is this the 2025?
This Tesla.
But the irony, of course, now is that the Tesla is becoming like the darling, the MAGA truck, the MAGA, vehicle. There's all these people posting online like, I'm buying a Tesla, to support Elon Musk.
Well, the funniest thing was after Trump did his photo op, buying a red Tesla, inquiries of people looking to buy a Tesla, they actually they spiked.
Well, what do you mean actually? He's the president of the United States. I mean, imagine either this network or the Epic Times. Imagine if the president said like, you should subscribe to this newspaper. Of course it would be a huge.
Well, the share price went up around 10%. I mean, they had a bad month.
Well, yeah,
they're down 30.
Well,
for the month, but it's mostly because of the Europeans. I'm blaming the Europeans on this one because they're boycotting.
But it was nice seeing that President Trump out there on the White House lawn opening a car dealership. It was nice. It was nice, like seeing an American leader campaigning for American businesses, and it kind of reinstated.
They're going to double the production.
Yeah.
And it kind of reinstated this feeling of like us versus the world. Like we usually think about like leaders coming after big businesses in this country or any business in this country, but this was kind of a nod to, oh, it looks like we're in a different environment now, where we have tariffs going on, we have other people competing against us. We should direct some of our attention to our own national,
Well, and the funniest thing with this whole picture is that because other countries have been taking advantage of us so long, we have a lot of leeway to do it. You know what I mean? There's a lot of ground for us to take back before it even affects our interest for the most part.
Oh, you know what? I didn't think of that until you just said it. It's true, because there's like a real juxtaposition there, right? On the one hand, you have these tariffs saying, hey, if you're going to be manufacturing outside of the U.S. and bringing it in, then we're going to set up like a 25% tariff. But it's true. I didn't realize that that's the other side of the coin. It's like, hey, buy a Tesla because it's American made and it's, Texas made, right? Or
yeah, he moved it from California to Texas.
Right. Yeah. And the whole supply chain is in Texas, I think, except for the raw materials.
But the funny thing is, I mean, people argue that Elon Musk is doing this for money and so on. But honestly, if he wanted to get money, he would have stayed with the Democrats, because the environmental regulations, the guy runs one of the biggest electric vehicle businesses. He's the electric vehicle guy. You'd think that he would not want the EV mandates to go away. You'd think he'd be the guy pumping his fist for like Gavin Newsom in California to keep the
I think
mandates.
The power of the federal government means a little bit more than the amount of money he'll lose with Tesla.
But he'd be a lot better with Biden, I think. Maintaining the EV mandates.
I just don't think he would have gotten the same position if he was with Biden.
You don't think so?
No, I think
until he bought X.
Yes.
That was when things
I think Trump sees him really as a big part of why he won the election.
Yeah, and he talks about him being this great patriot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he literally bought Trump the greatest marketing platform in the U.S., X, Twitter, and just used it to campaign for him.
Yeah.
So now, I mean, I think the power of that office and the power that he's around and the authority that he has, even though he doesn't have official and he's a part of Doge and it's this and it's that, it's worth a lot more than being the CEO of Tesla.
Maybe.
So you mentioned him buying the largest platform that you could for Trump, meaning X. Ironically, it's a direct competitor to Truth Social, but I guess we're not going to mention that part.
Actually, probably made Truth Social lose some money, funny enough.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
So speaking of X, they recently took down a network of Chinese accounts. I think you broke the story, if I'm not mistaken, Josh. What was that about?
Peter Svaab did, one of our investigative reporters. But of course, I posted about it, and we got a lot of attention on it. But yeah, Epoch Times launched an investigation. So New York Times running their literal nonstop stream of hit pieces against Shen Yun Performing Arts, an organization being targeted by the Chinese Communist Party. And here's New York Times siding with the CCP on this, writing basically this propaganda. They write these hit pieces against Shen Yun, targeting them and so on, fully in line with CCP propaganda. And then we're looking at the traffic on it, looking at what are these people saying about the article? It looks like there's a bunch of fake accounts. And so we're like, are these fake accounts? Is the Chinese Communist Party promoting the New York Times? Or
what made it obvious that it was a fake account?
80% had 0 followers, for example. I think the most shared article New York Times has had in a long time was one of these articles. 0 followers on some of these accounts. You go on the accounts, it's like they're created recently or they were absent for a long time. It looks like some maybe hacked an account or bought an account, for example. You have, for example, these accounts, and all they focus on is CCP propaganda, just pushing CCP talking points, or transnational repression. They're trying to push the CCP's propaganda against religion and so on like that. It's like all of these accounts came out en masse behind the New York Times. And so Epoch Times, they're investigating it. We look into it, of course. We notify X, saying, hey, it looks like there's a lot of fake accounts. They take down, I believe the first wave was 300 that Epoch Times alerted them of. And then we look further into it. Sure enough, there's thousands and thousands of them. We report to X. X takes down thousands and thousands of them. And so, yeah, a bunch of fake, apparently what looked like CCP-tied accounts were promoting the New York Times, doing their hit pieces.
Wow, who would have thought that the New York Times had gone so far left?
Yeah, who'd have thought?
Who'd have thought? Wow. Well, that's good. I mean, that's an excellent example of true investigative journalism.